So if I say Roy G. Biv, how many people out there know what the heck I'm talking about? That is the acronym for the colors of the rainbow. And if you've been following along, you know that we are looking again at some of those colors and new ways in which to welcome different colors of the rainbow into your dye practice. Hi, this is Margaret Byrd and welcome to Color Quest. Last week we looked at yellow from a plant by the name of Weld. Wonderful dye source. This week we're going to move on to the O in Roy G. Biv, and that is for orange. We're going to see what the over dyeing of Weld can bring us in the way of some very yummy orange colors. So let's go check out orange. So starting off with yellow in this new journey through the rainbow was done on purpose because yellow is such a common color that we can find from so many different plants. Orange is a close second. And some of the plants that bring us yellow can also bring us orange. So here at Color Quest over the last few years, some of the plant matter that we use to bring about orange in our dye pot on its own included things like yellow onion skin. You'd think yellow there, but in fact the color is pretty orange. We also looked at some flowers that lean into the orange family like marigold and coreopsis as well as cosmos. All of those can also bring about yellow, but sometimes you can push it and find orange too. Now, stepping beyond flowers, you can find orange from things like bracken fern or lichen. As a matter of fact, some of the lichens will welcome orange into your dye studio. And then there are plants like eucalyptus, where many species of eucalyptus leaves bring about an orange color, and aloe vera that you can push into the orange realm simply by playing with the pH. Now, pH is always the dyer's secret to expanding your palette, and some of the flowers I mentioned can shift with a pH, and you can even do that with turmeric. As a root, that brings a vibrant yellow. We didn't talk about that last week, but it also can shift over to a delicious orange color by adding an alkaline like baking soda. Now in today's video, we're going to be looking at doing an over dye process. And that is by taking the yellow that we made last week with Weld and introducing a different dye source on top of it to bring about orange. And if you remember your color theory, you know that by adding red to yellow, we can see orange appear. So today's plant that we're going to look to over dye our Weld is madder. We've had a few videos here on madder root. It is a plant where the color comes from the root, and it can produce orange on its own as well as reds. It is a traditional dye source for red that has been used for centuries. And today we're going to look at madder specifically as an over dye to our Weld yellow. So while I was in Peru, I also played around with mixing colors in order to produce orange. And I used a flower called Flor Collie, which brings about yellow, and we introduced cochineal to invite reds. Now cochineal tends to be more pinkish, but it can also go into reds and oranges all on its own. But today we'll be looking at madder to do that. Now when I was in Peru, we did the mixing right in the pot. So I was doing some real chemistry there. Today, however, I'd like to look specifically at the over dye process. It is another tool in your dyer's toolbox that you can use to continue to expand your palette, and the colors are just different. So let's see how we're gonna work with madder today by over dyeing on the vibrant yellow of Weld. So here is the exhaust Weld that I dried and kept. I will use this again because these plants will often bring color for a very long time beyond the first dye session. And here are the results. You can go back and look at the video from last week to see how to make these different yellows. But we basically dyed wool, silk, as well as cotton. Now, the silk didn't take it evenly, and I talked a little bit about some of the reasons why that could be, but I'm not too worried about it. We still got some beautiful yellows there. And then, of course, the wool always is such a star as a natural dye base. The wool and the silk were pre-treated already with alum, aluminum potassium sulfate as their mordant, and the cotton was pre-treated with aluminum acetate. You can always go back and learn more about that. So today we're not going to worry about pre-treating, washing, or mordanting our fiber because this is the fiber base that we're going to be using with our madder. Now I have two different forms of madder. I have one which is the whole madder root that I have purchased from Botanical Colors. I really like to work with this. And I also have the ground up root that I got from my CSA box from the Color Farm. Worked with that in some previous videos here a few weeks ago. Because it is a root-based or wood-based dye source, I'm going to need to soak it in order to allow that color to emerge first from the root itself. But before we do that, we need to weigh it. You can do different percentages for madder root, but in order to get the deepest color, we are going to do 100% weight of fiber. So let's go ahead and weigh our fiber first, and then that will determine what we're going to do for our weight of madder. So although I have two different sources for my madder root today, I'm going to choose the ground version. And the only reason for that is that the more you cut up a plant madder, the more opportunity and surface area there is for that color to emerge. So although I have the whole roots, which work beautifully, it would just take longer for the soak of that in order to welcome the color. By using the ground pieces, the color should come a little more rapidly, but we still are going to soak it. We will measure our dry fiber first, weigh out the root, and then get that soaking overnight. I let that madder root soak overnight and it looks fantastic. So much color has emerged just from a cold soak in a 24-hour period of time. Now it's time to heat it up. With madder, you want to watch your heat. You always want to watch your heat anyway. I like to do it on a slow simmer for everything, really. You want to try to avoid it getting too hot or boiling because madder and the redness in it can turn to brown. So just be careful with your heat. I'm going to let that simmer slowly for about an hour to extract more of that red, and then we'll let it cool in the pot. Always like to do that. And then we will attempt to strain out the madder root bits. I could have put the madder root into cheesecloth or a nut milk bag in order to avoid having to do this, but instead we'll just pour it through a nut milk bag, grab that root out, and then heat it back up so we can put our fiber in and see what kind of a beautiful orange is going to emerge. notice that before I work with any of my fibers, I always wet it. You want to wet your fiber before putting it into a mordant bath or a dye bath because that allows for the oxygen to disperse, giving more room for that color to come into the fiber itself. So while my madder root is simmering, I'm going to put my Weld dyed fibers into water and let that soak for the hour that I'm going to have that dye pot heating up and bringing more of that madder root color into the dye. We have had the madder root on the stovetop and cooled down now so we can handle it. We're going to strain it through a nut milk bag. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can put your fiber right into the dye pot with the madder root still floating in there. You'll just have potentially a chance for some pieces to adhere to your fiber, which can cause a darker color. You might get a speckled effect. Or worst case is you just have to rinse it a lot more in order to get those little tiny bits of madder root off your fiber. Up to you, but let's go ahead and strain it through a nut milk bag so we can get as few of pieces floating around in that dye so we can get our Weld pieces in and soaking in the dye pot. All right, here is the first sample that I made, and dang, it is dark. So I left this in the pot of madder for about an hour and a half. It's a very common thing that I do. I turned off the heat, let it sit, and guess what? The madder just took over. So although this has an undertone that gives it an orange quality, madder on its own can do that. So we'll take a look at that as compared to some other samples I've done in the past with simply madder. And also, let's do another experiment. So yes, madder is strong. I didn't really think much about the fact that it was going to overtake the Weld sample. So I think what we should do is try something else, and that is putting another Weld sample in and only leave it in the madder dye for a very short amount of time. I had an expectation of having more of a bright light orange, and in fact that madder just took over and made it that deep, richer, reddish orange. And I was hoping to get just a completely different color. So let's try that out with a timed amount inside of the madder at something very short. 15 minutes is all I'm going to do. We'll pull it out and see if we like the color, and if so, we'll just take it out at that point. Remember that you can make decisions around that when you're looking at your color palette. If you want to leave something in for a short amount of time to have a lighter color, by all means, that's your choice. You do want to give it some time in the heat to be able to attach to the fiber itself, but that decision around how long you want to keep it in the dye is really up to you, and it can make a big difference. So let's see what a short period of time inside the madder root dye is going to do with these yellow Weld samples. Okay, that's a bit more of what I expected. And it really shows you how strong matter can be. So let's take a look at the results all together. So there you have it. We started off with Weld. Here are the pieces, that really vibrant yellow. I then put it into madder for quite a long time, didn't think much about it, and look at how almost red those turned. They still have that nice undertone. And this was 15 minutes in madder. This is much more of what I expected in terms of the orange, and you can see just how light it is. Once you compare them next to each other, you get a sense of it. So that just goes to show you that there can be so many influences. Now, I happen to have some madder pieces, cotton, that I dyed here at Color Quest in the past. We did some shifting here using alkaline and acidic, but this shows you how orange madder can actually be on its own. This was at maybe 20% madder. So definitely the percentages can make a difference, whereas these were 100% madder, and then I think this was even shifted with an alkaline. This was shifted back with an acidic. So got quite orange. So as you can see, you can get orange definitely with madder on its own, but none of them look like this color. So this orange is that really bright orange. This almost looks yellow here, but if you compare it against the yellow, you can see it could maybe have stayed in a little bit longer, but still only 15 minutes. And this was really more of the orange I was expecting. So wow, the lighting is so interesting how different it can look. So there's the yellow, there's that light orange, and again. Anyway, interesting, right? So just ways in which you can bring different kinds of colors. Oranges from the deeper orange reds to the very light and bright. So amazing stuff here. Just like a painter's palette. Never a dull moment here at Color Quest, right? So I hope in this tutorial you learned a little bit more about the ability to do over dyeing as an alternative, or a way in which you can invite some different shades within the same color realm. And you can see how powerful it can be leaving dyes in for longer periods of time versus choosing to remove something earlier on. So remember, you have choices and experiment. That's what I always say. I really learned a lot just by doing these 2 different soaks, and I got 2 more different colors, different from straight madder, and added a few more to my orange spectrum. Now, next week, we're not going to be moving on to red, not yet. We, in fact, are going to go on the opposite side of yellow, and we're going to take a look at green and how we might use Weld as our base dye on a piece of fiber, and then utilize some magical over dyeing in order to bring about green. So, have a great week, and I can't wait to see you here next Friday on Color Quest.